Consciousness is a result of raising and lowering your frequency. So there's a whole understanding that you already have that exists within your fourth dimensional level of consciousness of what you're doing when you're in the dream state. You don't have to even remember it here. It helps your fourth dimensional self to get its information across to you. If you hear it out here in the 3D world, it makes a link to wake up the aparthy in your third strand and in your mental body that will allow that information to come down more quickly. But you have the information. The information from your dreams is with you right now. The information that we're going to explore today that gets into mega mechanics on a cosmic level and then takes it down into understanding mechanics on a personal level. This isn't my information. This isn't information that's just the Guardians. Every one of you has portions of this information literally encoded in your templates. It is literally alive in little fragmented, not quite connected yet, chemical forms in your chemical DNA. It's living information that belongs to you. And the use of going to workshops and things where other people have some information that they've awakened in themselves to share, they've brought it into memory, is because they can transmit the frequency to you, and it helps to stimulate the activation of your aparthy, which helps to bring the information in from your own cellular memory. So we're involved in a process here, and the information that I'm going to share with you today that has to do with Stargate structure and it has to do with manifestation templates and source, if it sounds far out or out there to you, just realize there's a part of you out there with me. There's a part of each of us that's stationed. Our consciousness is stationed within a 15-dimensional system. And then there are 3 levels of primal creation sound fields beyond that. And then there is a full expansion into the unity of Source, where we are all one being. I am you and you are me, and we are all that is, when we know ourselves as Source. When we come into feeling the sensations involved with those statements, it changes the orientation of the emotional body, where separation from others isn't real. That doesn't mean you won't have conflicts with people sometimes. But when you have conflict, it will be approached with absolute love. In the same way, perhaps, that a mother would approach a child who's misbehaving. You still love the child, and that is not debatable. It is given, it is unconditional, and it is not dependent upon their behavior or their attitude. The love is simply given. However, the actions can be judged. The child's worth is not judged. The child's blessedness is not judged. But if actions are being taken that are destructive to the child or destructive to others, which is not good for the child either, then intervention is provided with love. There's tough love and there's soft love. When we go into understanding that we are all one, even with the bugs and the birds and the trees and the molecules of water and all of the things that are out there on this planet, and that goes for everything in our system, in our density level and its universes, and also within the 5 density levels, also within all the other time matrices in creation, because this is not the only one. We begin to have, it's an awakening. That's a word that's overused and quite abused in this day and age, but it is an awakening of a cognition that once it's awake and you start to feel its flutters moving through your system, moving through your emotional body, moving through your mental body, they're physical sensations. It'll download eventually into strand 1 where it's felt in the body. When you get to that point, there's no turning back. You won't shut down the aparthy anymore, because the state that it brings you into is such a state of expanded feeling that even in the face of what other people would look at as terror, or in the face of what other people would judge as horrible circumstance or threatening circumstance, you can be in the world, actively and fully engaged in the world, but not of it, which means you're not controlled by it, which means you're becoming the master of your hologram. It's not your master. It means you can walk through situations that are joyful and fully experience the joy and let it move through you. And you can also walk through experiences that can be scary and not pleasant, and you can still hold the preference that, yeah, it would be nice if it wasn't this way right now, and know that you are actively working to heal it, so to help it the occasion or the event rise to a higher level. But you can get to the point, even the point of body control, where you can control pain, where you can control your reaction, you can choose your reaction. The hardest part of the reaction is to choose. A lot of people think it's the mental body, because when you first start to become a master of your hologram, mental body training is what usually comes first, where you learn that you need to choose your thoughts. And before you can choose them, you have to see what they're doing in there. So you need to become mindful, which means you take some time to be alone, privately, with no music on, no distraction. You simply close your eyes and say, all right, self, I'm just going to observe. You learn to observe what's happening in the space in your head first, without the sensory distraction. The best place to do it is in a comfortable temperature room that's dark, where you don't have light distracting you, you don't have temperature variation distracting you. And a lot of people, I found, those sensory deprivation chambers that some forms of therapy use, I've known some people that can't deal with that type of environment at all because they are so frightened and they have so many fear patterns built up around themselves and what might be in there, because they have all sorts of thought patterns running around on the subconscious level that are controlling and directing their energy. And it can be very scary when you first go into a confrontation with those parts of yourself. Mild sensory deprivation, you don't have to go hire a chamber or a therapist that'll do it for you, but putting yourself in a quiet, comfortable room in an environment where you feel safe and simply going into quiet, into the stillness. And in the stillness is where all action takes place. You'll hit a place of stillness. At first you'll get bored. Then you will find one of the first things that happens, 20 different thoughts come rushing in at once. What am I going to have for dinner? When is it I'm going on that trip? When are the kids going to be home? You will find chatter. You will find mental chatter that goes on and on and on and on and on, even when you stop listening to it. You can hear it going, and you can say, what part of me is saying this stuff? Where is it coming from? And you realize it's either a part of you or somebody's talking to you from someplace else. One of the first things to do is when you identify the mental chatter, you're going to direct it on what to do. It is a chaos pattern of several parts of your own consciousness, usually, unless there's something messing with your fields or unless you're getting direct verbal communication from your higher parts. But usually, the first level of the voices you will hear are patterns of energy that are stuck in your three-dimensional body, having conversations with themselves and trying to get your attention on the three-dimensional level. They're like little thought children that are parts of you. You'll have your inner child in there that has all sorts of things that it didn't get the way it wanted when it was younger, and it feels all sorts of things. And it may be a sad little child that just wants to feel safe and it's scared of everything, or it may be a really angry little child that wants to just bite everybody that it sees. And if you've trained yourself to be a nice person on the outside, and you find an inner child that wants to bite the ankles of every person that walks in the door and has very what you would consider irrational thoughts. I hate that person, I wish that would blow up, I wish the world would be destroyed. You will find some of these sometimes in you. First of all, you have to realize you're not abnormal, you're not psychotic, you're not nuts. Psychosis comes from when those energy patterns build up a stronger energy imprint than the energy that's being processed through the conscious rational mind. And if psychosis comes out in chemical form as well. It creates imbalances in the brain chemistry, which can even create shutdown of certain functions in the organ systems that can create deformities in the brain itself and other organ systems. What's interesting is in the hologram, thoughts will wear chemical clothes, which means thought forms that are energy forms are templates that accrete the intermediary phase particulates that then create a reaction in terms of what we perceive as matter densification. So all of those parts of you that you will start to find when you go into your own headspace actually have chemical bodies of their own. But if they're simply portions of your own identity from this lifetime, thought forms that you never assimilated, ideas or emotional reaction patterns that you had to different events in your life, they exist in your body as chemical form. They will be some type of chemical molecular structure in your body. In fact, the ones that are very disharmonic are the ones that cause chemical disease in the body. Disease is not the natural condition for the human body. Disease comes from templates, matter templates, scalar waveforms that are thought forms that are stuck and disharmonic with the natural frequency sequencing of the dimensional structure and the dimensional structure that the body is built on. They create blockages of energy, and they create distortions in the geometrical relationships between scalar waves in the manifestation template. Now, the manifestation template has a job. Its job is to take the consciousness it's composed of and manufacture it into a certain energy signature that from this state of awareness we can perceive as chemical reality, molecular atomic reality. Every thought you think has a chemical reality in your body. If somebody says, where are your thoughts? Well, there are a lot of places, but one of the places are they're running through your blood right now. They're running through your organ systems. They're in your body doing things, in your physical body. So they're not, science tends to look at thought as one of those unquantifiable things that's out there someplace where it's a result of physical phenomena, but it is not a physical phenomena itself. Thought is just as physical as your physical body is. It has just as much of a matter component as your physical body does. And you can also reverse that statement. That would mean if thoughts are things, things are thoughts. That would mean that your physical body, the planet's physical body, were thought forms. And if we think about thoughts, we think, okay, well, thoughts are, you can change them easy, you can move them around, you can make them go away, you can do all sorts of things with them because they're mutable. They respond to consciousness. So your consciousness can affect them and direct them places. But then we think a little differently usually. We're programmed by our culture to think about our physical bodies and the physical world in a very different way. Here we are, stuck in a physical world. It might be a nice physical world, we might be having a good experience, but there's a big difference between thoughts and things, between imagination and reality. If people get too far out in imagination, they're considered crazy, because the other people that are considering them crazy absolutely know that, well, this is physically real and that isn't. Oh, really? If it's all thought form reality, and all thought form reality has some type of chemical matter manifestation, there is no difference between the two substances, which means that we're all crazy because we think we're in a solid world, or it means when we use imagination or when we have perceptions or expansions of consciousness that take us into the realm that psychologists might want to say, put labels on, what we are actually doing is participating in a reality field that has a different chemical structure of matter, but it is just as real in its space-time location as we are. When we begin to experience things like dreams or visions, or if we have the ability to close our eyes and imagine going to another place, it can be a pretty place that you've gone on vacation, where you just project a part of your consciousness there, or it can be another planet because you want to check out the scenery. What most people don't realize is when we are creatively visualizing, we are creating thought forms that will fill out in chemical form within the frequency bands. I'm sorry about this. I don't know why it's doing this. There's something it seems to do it when I walk, but I have a hard time holding still. Anyway, we can. If we start to realize that when we think a thought, or let's say, you know that your sister's not feeling good and she lives in California and you live in New Jersey. And you can't call her, but you really, really would like to say something to her, make sure she's okay. A part of you, with that thought, literally projects all the way across that distance in an instant. And it manifests as part of the environmental chemical field in the area where she is. And it temporarily interfaces with her biofields. You have created a manifestation, but it's within usually the fourth dimensional frequency bands, where it doesn't yet, when you get good at it, you may scare your sister to death because you actually popped up at her door out of nowhere and then disappeared again. There are people, not too many on the planet right now, there are a number who claim it, but I have only about 3 that I know of that can actually do it. They can consciously bilocate, which means they're aware enough and they have enough strand activation in their DNA, enough chemicals working in the DNA, that they can pull in frequency from the next density level, which means 3 dimensions up, dimension 4, 5, and 6. So they can create almost a double of frequency effect in the physical body, which allows more chemicals to be produced in the thought form. And they can send the thought forms where they desire. And in sending them, they can literally manifest a hologram of themselves there that would look just as real and be just as physical. And if it happened to get hit by a car, it would get hurt. It's a physical being temporarily. And then it flashes off and the energy comes back to the person who sent it. There are people who can do this. This is a potentiality all humans have. It's not going to be one of our first to learn. But this is where we're going, because we're in a thought form field. Yes?
I've experienced in dream time people showing up in my room, and they're really there, and I'm opening my eyes, and I'm talking to them, and I'm trying to touch them, and I've reached out.
Right.
And so people do that in dream time as well?
Yep.
And are they conscious usually?
Usually they're very conscious of doing it in the dream state, but whether or not they remember they did it will depend upon if they have those frequencies open, not just in the 4th strand, but in the 3rd strand, to bring that information down in so they have memory of what they did. Most of us run around all the time talking to each other in the dream state. And then we forget, you know? But when we get that weird little feeling of deja vu, you seem familiar to me. You knew each other from somewhere. It might be reincarnational from other space-time vectors, or it might be dream time from other space-time vectors. In fact, it's kind of funny, but with these workshops are very unique. The work I'm in has had a life of its own ever since the beginning. And there has been a call put out on 6-dimensional frequencies, which means it comes through the 6th sub-frequency band in each of the lower dimensional frequencies. And there have been gatherings of people on the density 2 levels. We meet first there. And that's where the people who come to the workshops happen to, in their hologram, get some exposure to the fact that these workshops exist and get a feeling that it might be something that they want to explore. Because their consciousness in density 2 already went there. So you already have the information from when you went there and got the information from the higher levels. So all you need to do is have the frequency transmitted here that matches it, which will wake it up in your bodies. So it's like we all know each other already, and everything knows each other eventually when you get back into the source space. But even on the dream state level, we interact with each other all of the time. We resolve conflicts there. We choose agreements there. That's where parents and children choose each other. When we're born, it is always by choice. The parents choose to be parents, and the person incarnating has the choice as to what set of available parents they will come to. Because the person who is going to be the incarnating soul has a certain itinerary, its reason for incarnating, and it will need certain qualities in the DNA template in order to fulfill whatever the particular choice of mission is. So the parents will be chosen by the child. That means when you were children, before you came into your bodies, you chose your parents. Some of us have had horrendous parents. You think, why in God's name did I ever choose that? What am I, a masochist? You know? There are a lot of reasons why we sometimes choose people as our biological parents, or even our surrogate parents, if our biological ones aren't available, that treat us in ways that we really wish they didn't, that have left us things to heal and clear, that have taken many, many years and we're probably still doing, and probably will be doing for the next couple of lifetimes. There are lessons to be learned in situations like this. Many times it's a karmic resolution, where you had other relationships to each other in different time vectors that are going on now. So in this time vector, you came to fix a part of that if it was going bad. But it's not always karmic. Sometimes it's as simple as DNA. It's as simple as, particularly with indigo children, some of the indigo children have the worst experiences in their parent experiences, because they have to have very specific codes in the DNA to be able to come in with the 6th strand activated at birth, which is to allow them in adulthood to be able to open up their body templates and run the highest frequencies in this time matrix down into the planetary grids so they can be part of the team that's going to run the stargates. So when it comes to, well, there's 5 sets of parents available that when you combine them have the right frequencies to give me the template I need, and out of the 5, I can only stand 1 of those 10 people. I mean, it's not that you don't love them, because from those spaces you don't judge people and get into isms quite as much with them. But there's still preferences where people that you have a lot of incarnational experiences with in other vectors, you might feel a warm fuzziness for, and oh yeah, I want you to be my mom. But if that combination does not suit best what your purpose is for incarnating, you may choose the one who, you may be a loving person at this point, but they haven't evolved past the point where they're still learning their lessons. So you actually come in, you get from them the gift of a DNA template that you needed, and you give to them a gift of certain experiences that will, in their own way, and often through your suffering, that you will learn to heal and transmute later because you have the capacity to do it. You have given back a gift of taking part of their chaotic energies from their DNA and taking it into your own consciousness where it becomes your job to transmute it. There's the old saying of the sins of the father being passed on to the children, the sins of the parents. We get part of our DNA code, our chemical DNA, from the mother and part from the father. That means if we have those chemicals there, we've received an imprint of their templates, their manifestation templates, their DNA templates, which means part of their scalar wave patterns became ours, became linked with our consciousness. That becomes the first imprint of our 3-dimensional personality and our identity, that our first part of growth is learning to clear and harmonize the energy patterns we picked up through fetal integration. And when we do that, and as we do that, we're able to bring in our higher levels of consciousness and activate the higher strands. So there's a whole process of manifestation that when we talk about manifestation templates, when we talk about Partakai, Partake, and Particum units, you have these scientific things over here. You have the stuff that we call reality here that everybody deals with and everybody's been through, like, birth and growing and parents that aren't perfect. And then you have the divine spirit over here. They're not separate things. They're all aspects of the same phenomena we call existing, we call being alive. So it's worth understanding some of the physics components. You don't have to be able to, there's some names of particles that I haven't even looked up yet that they were naming, and I'm wondering if some of them are even there. If you even understand basically that, okay, these particles do exist and they've been identified, you don't have to memorize what every one of the particles were, unless you're going to work with it directly for some reason. But just realizing, to give the mental body the understanding that, oh, this is how the pieces fit together. We're starting to assemble the jigsaw puzzle that is our perceptions. Our consciousness is in dimensionalization, which means it's stationed right now in 15 different levels with 15 different angular rotation of particle spins to deal with. And then there's a whole portion of it that's stationed outside of the time matrix in what's called the sound fields. I'll talk about the sound fields in a minute, because when we get into understanding the creation process, the diagrams that are up here, I'll get into in a minute a little bit. A lot of you have already seen them. These have to do with the structure that Partakai units, Partake, Partakai, and Particum, as they do their thing that I'll explain in a minute, they create forms, geometrical relationships that form a template. This is a visual representation of understanding some of the relationships of that template. You're not going to see that image hanging in the sky out in space or anything. But what that image is showing you relationships of certain parts of energy to certain other parts of energy. When we do manifestation templates ourselves, when we think a thought, we just created one. We created a manifestation template, whether we meant to or not. Our conscious mind here is not the only part of us that constantly generates thought forms. And the thought forms will fill out someplace in chemicals. The emotional body is a part of our consciousness that is associated with the second strand of DNA. It's the D2 part of our consciousness, the part of ourselves that are stationed. The consciousness is focused in the second dimensional frequency bands. That part of us thinks too. It feels, it thinks, and it has reaction to what it perceives. The part of ourself that's our emotional body right now is partly associated with the subconscious mind. because there's been something done to our DNA that's blocked the natural ability of the emotional body part of ourselves to communicate directly with the mental body part of ourselves, like they speak different languages. So sometimes the closest we can get to communication with that part of ourselves is we will have a feeling. We will have a sense of something. In fact, what we call the tactile sense, touch, being able to reach out and feel something, being able to feel temperature on you or wind blowing on you, being able to feel is an attribute of the D2 emotional body. It's known as the telluric body, the elemental body. It's the part of us that's formed of complex atomic structures, more complex atomic structures, not just subparticles, but it's made of atoms that form molecules that form chemical elemental substances. The waters in our body is mostly made of water. That's an element, but it's conscious. It's a part of our consciousness. We literally have a part of our consciousness right now manifesting, reincarnating, incarnating with us as water molecules. There's a part that's every component of atomic structure, subatomic structure, and chemical reality and organ structure within the body that science tells us is there, part of our outside bodies, is actually a manifestation of part of our consciousness. That means that your brain is conscious. It means that your big toe is as conscious as your brain is. It means that your liver is conscious. It means that your subatomic particles are conscious. And they're not a consciousness that's different from you. They're a form of manifestation that a part of your consciousness is taking on in order to build and manufacture your hologram so this part of your consciousness can see objectification. There are parts of us that right now operate subconsciously, which means below the focus of the conscious attention here. But they are not subconscious, below conscious, not conscious. They are not unconscious. They're just as conscious as we are in the ways natural for the scalar waveforms they're manifesting through in that particular part of the organism. As we do integration and we begin to activate our templates in our DNA, we begin the process of clearing what's blocking our understanding the language of the rest of ourselves. We start to integrate our body consciousness. And that's the only way we're going to be able to get enough rapport with our body consciousness, where when we ask it to do something as far as particle spin, it might actually listen. One of the things that's really helpful, there's a lot of techniques that we use to use Merkaba mechanics, which we'll talk about probably later this afternoon, to get the atomic structure to do certain things. But the first thing, before you even use mechanics like that, is to simply remember it's a part of your consciousness. It's alive, sentient, and aware like you are. Ask first. Just ask it first. And then help it by setting what the mental body knows it can do, is setting a mathematical grid that will assist it to do so. It's not our job to dominate our emotional bodies or our physical bodies. It's our job to integrate them and realize that they're a part of our consciousness. And if you happen to be, like say, pretend you were actually the atoms that form the big toe of a person. Now, you know yourself as sentient, and you have your reality field, and you have your free will that you sense as a part of your right of being. You wouldn't like it if somebody, just because it was part of you, forced its will on you. That's taken away your free will, particularly if you didn't like what it felt like, particularly if what it wanted you to do actually caused pain or disharmony for you. So if you were an atom in a big toe of a whole person's body, you would appreciate it if that level of the consciousness that's above your frequency asked you if it was okay and asked if you would help, if you would be willing to co-create a certain condition. That's what our higher selves are doing that are in the higher dimensional fields. It's kind of like we're the big toe in a bigger body. And what's really strange is there's more reality to that in the hologram than we might imagine. All right, when we talk about big toes, atoms and big toes, and relationships of consciousness levels to each other, we're kind of like part of the structure that forms a body. The self we know as this is me, my consciousness, the part of you that's stationed seemingly in your head, which is actually stationed throughout your body, but it feels like it's focused in your head. That part of you is actually a part of the atomic structure of who you will be as you integrate your higher parts. You have another body right now. We all do. The planet does. in density 2. You have another one in density 3 and another one in density 4. They exist with you at the same time, just like the atoms in your toe exist with you below the frequency or the station of your awareness. These higher bodies exist with you right now, and they have a physical form and a chemical translation. In the New Age movement, there's a lot of talk about the subtle energy bodies and about the auric field levels and those kind of things. Now, they are indications that those other bodies exist. And from here, the circular energy fields surrounding the body are the form that those higher levels of consciousness take when perceived from here. But actually, just like you have a seemingly physical body here, when you integrate fully 6 dimensions of consciousness, your body molecules here change, they expand, you change angular rotation of particle spin, and the speed of electrons as they move around the protons in your cells changes also. You accelerate in frequency, and your matter particles become less dense, and there's more space that appears between atoms. The body expands. You have a bigger body that's less dense. It's a semi-etheric body. Now, when we first were given the information on dimensional structure and density levels and all of those things, there weren't exactly names given to the type of matter other than like pre-matter, etheric matter, semi-etheric matter. It's like antimatter. Okay, what are these things? As we get into this afternoon a little, they've given us more names. They have to do with chemical realities, the chemical clothes that those levels of matter wear. We've known for a while that density 4 pre-matter is called hydroplasm, which means it's a liquid-based form. It can be basically conceptualized as liquid light, and it's of a higher frequency that doesn't appear as liquid in this dimension. It appears as invisible in this set of density, dimensions down here in this density. There are other body structures that we have. And the closest, I think, that information has come here has come through maybe in the last 100 years when people that were mediums in the old days, that now the new word for a medium is a channel, people who used to go into trance and let things come through them and talk to them, there would often be phenomena that left a ghost image in the air, and there would be fibers and strands of stuff hanging in the air. The stuff, they called it ectoplasm. That was the name the people down here created. The plasm part was correct. There are several types of plasm, which are interwoven strands of pre-chemical units, the ionized particulates, that I'll talk about in a little bit, that are a stage of particae, particae, and particum coming into densification. We have bodies made of each of the levels of density of matter. And as we begin to integrate ourselves, we will progressively begin to integrate that level of matter, frequencies and chemicals into the body, which will eventually change the chemical components of this body into that body. We get into manifestation templates. If we can understand that there's a simple transduction sequence, how consciousness transduces itself, morphs itself, changes itself into matter, how it puts its chemical clothing on. It starts with the units of primal substance that I've named, particae, particae, and particum, the trinity of creation, which is a form that everything is built upon. It starts with the 1 that becomes the 2 that becomes the 3. This goes into the physics of atoms and the physics of particles that happen before atoms and of particulates that happen before that. But there's a process of these particae units, these 3 particae units, 1 representing the whole and the other 2 representing smaller divisions of that whole that have broken down into polarization. They're actually consciousness moving back into source as 1 and flashing off, disappearing out of manifestation, and then flashing back on into polarity, back into particle and antiparticle reality field. There's a part of us at all times that is stationed within the expansion of source, that is not in polarity. That is how God is with us all the time. It moves so quickly our atoms and our subatomic particles and our particle, particle, and particum flash on and off so fast that we don't see our bodies disappear. But when you begin to slow time down by changing your vibration here, by activating different frequencies in the body, it's really neat because everybody appears and disappears. Like poof, poof, poof. And they all do it at a different sequence. It's like a bunch of Christmas tree lights. This was an analogy that you used that was very good. Christmas tree lights that turn on and off. Did you ever see those flasher light sets? They come out with like 8 different rhythms you can set on the dial. Kind of like that, where you have, say, one big long group of those all connected, but they're all choosing a different flash line sequence. That's what it looks like. And somewhere in there, there is absolute stillness, which is the foundation upon which the action of flashing on and off can take place. And it's the action of flashing on and off that allows the chemical clothes to come into manifestation and out of manifestation. On the scientific level, it's kind of interesting because that means that what the scientists see when they look through with their electron microscopes and they look at the parts of atoms and molecules and subatomic particles, there's a time thing going on. They're seeing a part of the reality of the manifestation of those particles, but they're not seeing, because their instruments cannot pick up the frequency or the speed or the angular rotation of particle spin, the points where those particles disappear, turn completely into something else, and then come back again. What's really interesting is when we get into subatomic particles that make up our body mass, they're not just particle X, Y, and Z, protons, electrons, neutrons, these things. These things actually transmute into each other. Protons become electrons, neutrons become protons, all sorts of neat things happen. But science misses the transition periods because they're happening so rapidly, some of them, and so slowly, some of the others. They're out of the range of perception, not only of scientists, the brains of scientists, or the brains of humans trying to see it, but also out of the range of the time distortion that you get by looking through a microscope. When we look through microscopes and telescopes, if we remember this is a holographic projection, we are using lenses that bend light, which means it's creating sound waves, which means it's changing interrelationships between templates. It allows us to see certain levels of the microscopic kingdom and allows us to see levels of the macroscopic kingdom that normally our sense facilities would not project out. But the thing is, we do have the sense facilities. If we can see these things through mechanical instrumentations, which are thought forms that were created out of the belief that we needed an instrument to do this because we did not have the ability to see these things ourselves, we don't need microscopes to see our microscopic particles. In fact, we will get a much more accurate assessment of what the particles actually look like and how they behave when we begin to turn on microvision, which is part of the natural senses that start to come with strand 4 activation. That's only 4th dimensional consciousness. We perceive this hologram because our consciousness is stationed 1-dimensional frequency band above. So we see below. 1 dimension below, we see as solid. When we begin to understand what we're seeing in relation to where our consciousness is, and then where our consciousness is in relation to vibration, in relation to frequency, which means in relation to color, we find ourselves with a tool called color that's easily recognized and identifiable as a means to begin to direct where our consciousness is stationed so we can get more control over where our manifestation, what frequency band is going to take place within. There are all sorts of things that when human consciousness is functioning within its hologram the way it was designed to do, we don't need things like microscopes, telescopes, cars, houses, stuff. The ancient civilizations, very ancient ones, hundreds, thousands of years ago, they didn't have a lot of stuff. They didn't have junkyards like we do. They didn't have a problem with disposing of things. And it wasn't because they were primitive cultures at all. In fact, they didn't bury bodies because originally they didn't even die. They went back through the stargates if they were tired of being here. When certain things happened to the DNA where they did die, they didn't die and bury a body. They transmuted it with frequency. And the parts that wouldn't transmute would become dust, ashes to ashes and dust to dust. it would all be controlled by the most powerful source force in the universe, thought. Because thought is the director of frequency. Everything is formed of frequency. So we're working back right now. We're actually moving back in time. We're evolving back in time, backward, to reclaim the knowledge and the power and the understanding and the mission that was once ours. When we go back to the point of our creation and entry into the hologram, that means we go back to our point of primal substance that exists right now with us, because the creation point is always in the now, just as the ending point is. Your comings and goings and everything in between are right here, right now, and they exist as vibrational energy fields that you can learn to move your consciousness to find out any information you desire that will help you make choices in the present moment time, because it is all happening in the present moment time. When we get into Partakai units, the units do something. They start to what's called accrete, or pull together, draw together by like attraction. So Partakam units will pull together. They will attract more Partakam units. They will actually manufacture more. Every time a Partakai unit is created, and then it goes through a phasing where it replicates itself, keeps the original, and becomes the original split into polarity. It creates a charge and releases another of itself. So they're all over the place. The whole unified field is filled with Partakai, Partakai, and Partakam. And like little people that are lonesome all by themselves, they start to draw together and communicate energetically. Now, yourself as a Partakai unit will not use linear thought patterns and use the English language or the Spanish language or any of the languages that we know. It will communicate in direct cognition, which if scientists were looking at it, would represent an exchange of energy, of electromagnetic frequency. Partakai units build up to form first chains. And this has some relationship, probably not much, to what science was trying to figure out about the universal string theory, where things kind of strung together to begin the formation of the universe. I've not explored the string theory, but I think it has some elements of an understanding, at least some basic rudimentary issues about what Partakai do, even though Partakai aren't identified in it. Partakai, Partakai, and Partakam form first strings or chains or strands of groups of themselves. Then those strands start to interact with each other in different ways, at different angles. So consciousness, because these are units of consciousness, begins to interact with each other at different angles of perception, which is a different electromagnetic charge to begin with. It starts to set in motion energy dynamics that form grids of energy. You could look at it kind of like chicken wire. You know, chicken wire that has thin wires with lots of holes in between. You could look at a Partakai grid as something like that, but it's made out of little Partakai, Partakai, and Partakam units. Now, as the Partakai, Partakai, and Partakam units collect more of like kind unto themselves and form different grids of like charge, so you'd basically have a Partakam grid, a Partakai grid, and a Partakai grid. Now, the Partakai is the original unit that the other two came out of. So that would be the grounding field that the other fields take place within. The Partakai eventually forms antimatter. The Partakam eventually forms what we call dense matter here. And the Partakai forms what we call antimatter. That's where you get particle and antiparticle realities taking place, which implies once we're in density, once our consciousness has adopted the form of a Partakai grid and entered the experience of polarity of consciousness, where consciousness turns in and looks at itself at different angles, we are entering a situation of electromagnetic exchange. We are entering a situation where we are not just moving into a structure that exists outside of us. We are becoming this structure. It implies that a part of us becomes particles, a part of us becomes antiparticles, and a part of us becomes antiparticles. That means you have a parallel double in a place called the parallel universe on parallel Earth. This is part of the self that you'll integrate. Because in density 1, there's a little trick to the relationships between particle and antiparticle and antiparticle. When we get into the structure a little, I'll show you a chart that we put together to explain a bit of the relationship between Earth, what's called inner Earth, and parallel Earth in density 1, and then the density 2 counterpart of the Earth planet system, which is called Tara, and then the density 3 translation of the Earth Tara system, which is called Gaia, and then there's a 4th density template that Earth Terra Gaia come out of that's called Iramatena. The names are actually drawn from the sound tones, the composite sound tones of the units of consciousness as they vibrate and oscillate. They create sound. So when we're working with the material that's given by the Guardian Alliance, by the founders, we're working with word translations into a given language pattern that as closely matches possible the sound vibration of that object or being or thing. That's why in our work you'll find a lot of interesting names for things. Like later we'll talk about the primal life force currents that are called the Kirashe. And then there's the Kundare. These are sound tones. And you have Antankarana and Kundalini. Kundalini was actually not quite a sound tone translation. Antankarana was much closer. There have been pieces of this information brought here for thousands and thousands of years. There's little pieces in this book, in this sacred book, and little pieces in that sacred book, and it's all over the place. But this time we're getting it together. And here we will find that we have Partakai units form Partakai grids group together and start to pull in more like Partakam units. And they begin to build up something called a Kilan, which once the Partakam form grids, each of those grids has a different force in relation to electricity. One has a negative polarity, one has a positive polarity, and the other has the dual polarity, which is actually a 3 polarity. It's tripolar. They create 3 different angles of consciousness relating to itself, which is the process of beginning to create the template through which a 3-dimensional hologram that has external space, height, width, depth can be created on the screen of Partakai. So we get to the point where we have Partakai units, Partakai grids that build up to be Kilans, which is the beginning of creating enough Partakai units of the 3 different kind and having them interrelate with each other to form something called a Kilan, which is a crystal. It's a crystallization of thought. It is a crystallization of form. You have Partakai units that exist as not 3-dimensional forms, waveforms, until they reach a certain level of accretion where they build up form structure. This is where you start to get your basic mathematical and geometrical interrelationships that will give you the ability, as they come down in the matter density levels, the ability to project out things that have different shapes. So Partakai, Partakam become grids, their chains become grids, then they become Kilans. Now, Kilans do the same thing. They pull more of like particles, but now they're 3-dimensional particles, or the pre-dimensional particles. These are the things that will form dimensions, but they're not quite dimensionalized yet. Kilans form Kilan codes, which are composite groupings that reach a certain level of critical waveform, critical thrust. I would say critical mass, but they're not into mass yet. So it would be critical thrust or electrical component. Once they become Kilan codes, they become what is called a scalar wave. It is a spherical, standing particle, antiparticle, antiparticle wave that is a fixed point in a grid, kind of like, imagine it like a little flame that stays put and it's self-sustaining. It's a flame of consciousness that flashes off and on. When it flashes on, it becomes part of and manifests within the primal light fields and the dimensionalized light fields that we call the hologram of space-time. And when it flashes off, it goes back to its first state, which would be sound. So the qualities we call light and sound emerge from the interreactions between Partakai and Partakam. between chelons and chelon codes. Now, each dimensional level is created by a very specific mathematical formula for how many Partakai units will be in that particular dimension and what will their rhythm of flashing on and off be. That's what creates dimensionalization. Dimension 1 will have the slowest flashing on and off rhythm. That's the lowest frequency. Flashes on and off slow. Go up to D15 and flashes on and off really, really, really fast. The difference in flashing can be translated into the concepts or the realities of vibration and oscillation, which are two different things. When a Partakai unit, when a chelon, when your template flashes off, it contracts. It goes into energy holding instead of energy transmitting. It goes into a magnetic polarity that is vibration. When your template turns back on, you come back into the manifest hologram. You go from going into contraction, actually becoming sound, into vibration, becoming the vibration of sound, into becoming light. That is oscillation. So oscillation is like turning the lights on, and vibration is like turning it off. Oscillation is energy transmission or releasing, expansion of energy. And vibration is turning the light switch off, contracting the energy, and holding the energy inside. So here's a little trick in the New Age movement. Everybody said, oh, you have to raise your vibration, raise your vibration. No, you don't want to raise your vibration because you lower your frequency by raising your vibration, which means you go downward in the dimensional scale, not up. Which means you make your particles more dense, not more light. There are little tricks that if you don't realize some of the basic differences on how our consciousness, when it becomes chemical clothing and with its template interacts here, that we can get so easily tricked for doing things or telling ourselves statements which are words to us but become mathematical coding instructions to our body template. If we say, I want to raise my vibration, you are saying, I want to lower my frequency, become more dense, and contract my energy, not expand it to hold the rest of myself. So little tricks like this of understanding the physics are very, very practical. Because at least you know one thing, well, if I want to expand, which means I want to pull in more frequency into my body, which will de-densify my body progressively and make it grow less and less dense while my consciousness grows more and more expanded. This is how you transmute yourself back out of the hologram into at one with Source. You realize that you don't want to raise your vibration. You want to raise your oscillation rhythm. You want to make your flash line sequences, the turning off of Partakai and Partakay in your Partakam in your body, go more quickly. So the physics are important if spiritual development is important to you. This is where science and spirituality, science and religion, are both erroneous in their approaches. They both have a little bit of the picture, and they think they have the whole picture, and they don't. If we do not understand what we're telling ourselves with the words we choose, not realizing that they're mathematical instructions that turn into scalar waves that interact with the scalar waves in our template and create change, we are not going to get control of our spiritual integration process. No matter how hard we try to worship God, whoever, whatever that might be, we will never feel the full waking awareness of the I am God and I am totally at one with God connection that everybody that cares about being spiritual is looking for. So the physics are sacred and they are holy just as much as the spiritual teachings have been. And if you run into teachings out there, I don't care if they're traditional teachings that tell you it's evil to know that stuff, or, I mean, some people that work with the Bible use it that way. I mean, they twist certain things and they've added certain other books to help it along, where they teach you that you're going to go to hell if you learn this stuff. Why? Because somebody put those books there because somebody has a vested interest in controlling your power and using it for something else that's not your agenda but theirs. And if you use these mechanics, you will get in touch with you and your direct connection to God. Therefore, you won't need a personification or externalization of a God as if it was your creator, because you will know you are your creator because there's a part of you that is always at one with God. So we can look at the division between science and religion as part of the polarity problem here. There's a drama of polarity taking place on our planet. It's polarity that's gone out of balance. And as we learn the science and learn how it fits with the spirit, we get back into bringing that balance back to ourselves. And piece by piece, we heal not only ourselves, but we heal the planet as we do it. Once we get to the point where we have scalar waves, those little waves that stand still. Movement is created not by the scalar waves moving. They're not waves that move from point A to point B. They simply stand and flash off and on. But when they flash on in one place, they appear there, and when they flash off, they appear somewhere else from where they're flashing off. Everything is actually taking place in the same space, and all the scalar waves are taking place in the same space too. But it's the rhythm of their expansion and contraction, flashing on and flashing off, that creates the reality that many multiple reality fields that have their hologram and their chemical clothing can take place in the same exact location of space, all at the same time, yet appear to be separate from each other and invisible to each other, creating a multitude of huge universes and vast reality fields. It's all happening in one space, at one time, at one moment called now, in one area called God or Source. And the physics are what show you how that can happen. So the mental body can go, oh, that does make sense. Yeah, I guess God is real. Because here we're taught, you either believe God, in God, a God somewhere, blindly, and pick up an old book that's going to tell you how you have to behave in order to get this God's approval, so you don't go into this God's judgment. And I look at it this way. If the God, the way they're presenting it, knows so little about love, I'll fend for myself. If God was really like the books are telling us, a vengeful, wrathful God that will wipe out things on purpose and send you to hell if you can't figure out what you're supposed to do to try to be good. This is an old concept of certain forms of man or woman or fallen angelic putting their own attitudes, calling God themselves, and giving us images of God, taking our teachings that were really about this, about the sacred sciences of the sacred spirit that allowed each one of us to know we were God. Those teachings were twisted, edited, and taken to take us totally off track. Why? Because we're holographic projectors. We're thought form generators. If somebody's interested in our planet, and we were the security team, and somebody was interested in taking our power away from us so we could no longer function as the security team, but it would be very difficult to try to physically go in and force yourself onto the planet, because if you did, you'd have a whole lot of Star Wars happening over your head from the Guardian races that would come in and stop you. If you can trick them into creating their own prison, their own perceptual prison, by feeding them, first you'd have to do something to the DNA so they forget their higher dimensional parts. Then you need to feed them some thought forms to get them going on a new track of development that gets them to use the creative power, the scalar wave generation, to create a hologram where it appears that there's an external God. There's an external God that's planning to come down and fleet and visit us one day and say, oh, my children, we're back. We created you. Now do this. Our thought forms that we've been using since 22,000 BC, 25,500 BC, have been intentionally seeded to create distortion in our consciousness and to create illness and disease in our bodies. So while once the last age span we used to have was about 800 years, before that we were eternal. We just could transmute whenever we wanted to. We didn't die. Our thought forms have been used to imprison us, and it's actually us, the parts of ourselves that are in our molecular consciousness and the parts of ourselves that are in our elemental consciousness that are holding us imprisoned in density 1. We have been constantly having to reincarnate and put our consciousness back in a density 1 form because we haven't been able to get out of here frequency-wise. We haven't been able to hold in our templates the higher dimensional frequencies that would allow us to merge with that level of consciousness, change the angular rotation of particle spin, and take ourselves to the higher density levels. But that's kind of good that this has happened, because if our thought forms are what are imprisoning us, that have created a self-regulating police force right within our own bodies, that means our thought forms have the ability to be our liberators as well. And that's what we're doing. When we get to the point of understanding, we have a template that's made of part of chi units, part of K, part of chi, part of cum, chelons, and all of those things, chelons, chelon codes. We can look at that as the crystal body, the scalar wave body that flashes off and on, is the crystal body. is formed of things called fire letters, which are specific organizations of scalar waves that exist for each dimension. If you think of the cosmic template has 15-dimensional structure. Okay, you have primal sound fields I'll talk about later, 15-dimensional structure. Each one of those dimensions has a very specific organization of Partakai units that have a very specific flash line sequence, flashing on and off. Now, anything that's going to come into manifestation in that reality field is going to take on, as part of its core template, that particular structure of Partakai units. So, the universe, the cosmos and the universe, is made of fire letters, which are groups of Kilon codes that hold the scalar waves into particular arrangement that allows for dimensionalization so the hologram can be projected. We have a piece of that template right in us. Part of the core of our template is a microcosmic version of the macrocosmic cosmic template. So we are made of fire letters. We have fire letters within our bodies that literally anchor the portions of our consciousness into each dimensional band. Each of our DNA strand templates that forms a portion of our chemical DNA corresponds directly to one of those dimensional bands, which means that the template is made of the fire letters that make up that particular dimensional band. When we talk about the density levels of matter, we have first, coming from source expansion, we have first a contraction that creates a void. This is before we enter dimensionalization. We have expansion that creates a void, then a projection that creates the first sound. In the beginning was the void, and then in the void there was the word, the first sound of creation, which was the first vibration, because sound is made of vibrational movement, of energy holding, that makes units of energy move, that creates sound. So the first sound started the formation of the framework that we could experience manifestation within. There is something called the primal sound fields, or the Kundalini primal sound fields. And within those primal sound fields, by taking sound and the Partakai scalar units that are turned off but just vibrating, and turning part of them around and changing their polarity in relation to each other, light was created. That's what the symbol of the Vesica Pisces, the two interwoven circles, refers to. The sound field and the light field. And that space in between is where the hologram occurs. We have the sound field, the light field, and then dimensionalization starts. That's where the flash line sequences start to differ from each other. First you have Partakai, then you have Partakai turned off as vibration, sound, then you have Partakai all turned on and staying on, primal light fields. There are 3 levels. You have the blue, the violet, and the gold light spectrum. And then within those is where dimensionalization takes place, as the flash line sequences of the scalar waves are syncopated. Some go on, some go off. They all have different rhythms, like they're doing little dances, but standing in one place doing them. Our DNA templates and our body templates hold a microcosmic version of that macrocosmic cosmos. We have in ourselves a level of primal light field, of primal sound field, and of each of the 15 dimensions that take place within that. When we're dealing with the first 12 dimensional levels, which right now we're in D1, 2, 3. So we kind of start where we are and move upward into expansion. The first 12 levels have a particular type of flashline sequence that creates, from here we would progressively expand up to there. Then when we hit dimension 13, there's actually a contraction point that you have to expand, contract to a point, shift in your Partakai relationship, angular relationships to each other, before you can expand back out the time matrix again. So the first thing we deal with are the first 12 dimensional levels of our consciousness and ourself. That's our pre-matter template. It's called the Maharic shield. A shield is simply a word that refers to a 3-dimensional scalar template. So there's planetary shields that hold each 3-dimensional level of the planet's consciousness and its matter that translates into matter chemical flows. And we have shields. Our Maharic shield is our divine Christos blueprint. The word Christos responds to the D12 frequency. That's what the person who became known as Jesus in the Bible was trying to explain to the people of the times, was that He didn't say, worship me, I'm your Christ. In fact, that being is not really happy about what's happened to that message, because that being taught you, you have your inner Christos. Joshua and the people that worked with him taught the inner Christos that you have a D12 pre-matter template through which you and your body are always indelibly connected to Source. And it is through bringing your matter template here, up through the density levels, back to the pre-matter template, that you can gain mastery over moving in and out of the hologram at will. They were the original teachings of Christ. You look at what's in the Bible now, I swear there's like 3 or 4 different ones to begin with, because they there's some very strange inconsistencies in what's attributed to Christ. First he seems like this, oh, he'd never do that. Then he gets angry over here. It's like, wait a minute, he said you don't get angry over here. There's some contradictions. That's because most of the things that are being attributed to Christ saying in the Bible were not said by him. They were said by others, some of them part of the Anunnaki races. Now, when we go to our Christos template, we have the beginning of understanding how we have the ability to get, not only to get our manifestation powers back, but to get back the wisdom to know how to use those powers well. One of the biggest things for a lot of people that are really good people at heart it's like, oh gosh, if I could actually have the power to manifest anything I wanted to, it's a lot of power. Would I use it right? What if I didn't? What if I created horrible things? What if I hurt somebody? There's a fear because of ancient times and our cellular memory from those other time periods that bleeds through when we start to get our power back, where there's a resistance to having that power, because there were times in our growth process, all of us have gone through dramas in different time vectors, where we had to learn how to use that power appropriately. And if we accidentally used it wrong, or if we got a little too full of ourselves and used it wrong because we just had that delight and, wow, I have power, and trampled a few civilizations in the middle of it, there's going to be guilt attached to using power. There's going to be all sorts of things. But there's a part of us that has always known that we were innocent. Yes? We're over break time? Are we? Oh, okay. Okay. You need a break? All right. Well, we have lunch at 1:30, so if we don't take the break now, we probably won't get to taking the break because lunch is at 1:30. So we can do like a 15-minute now, okay? And then we'll get back. I'll pick up. We're going to be starting in about 2 minutes, everybody, so if you want to get back in your seats whenever you're ready. Now, I have a lot of ground that I want to cover with everybody this afternoon, and we're going to try to wrap up by somewhere between 6:30 and 7, I imagine. Then, for people who want to join us, between 9 and 9:30, we're going to be at Siesta Key Beach tonight, and we're going to be doing some energy work there. We're going to do our first round table, which by the end of today, the people who haven't heard of that before will know what it is. It's a Merkaba, group Merkaba, but done in a way that it does not link your Merkaba fields into the group field where you take on anybody's energy, which is the way most people are teaching Merkaba out there right now, unfortunately. Now, I'd like to finish up a little bit of the information that I was presenting this morning, where I was talking about primal substance and units of primal substance. The information that was given recently, that was part of the beginning of the security clearance data, was making that link between the templates of manifestation, the scalar wave templates of Partike, Partikai, Particum, Kilans, Kilan codes, and fire letters, linking that terminology up to the terminology the science uses to name identified particles. The in-between stage were the words myon, dion, and trion. We have Partikai units that manifest as dions. We have Partikai units. Partikai units manifest as trions. They're the ones that hold no charge and the potentiality for both negative and positive charge. They correspond to antimatter particles, which is what the density 5 reality fields are fully made of, the primal light fields. Now, this chart that I put up here. It's a little hard to see because we pulled it on a bubble jet printer, and it's really the Mylar this thing is supposed to be for the laser printer, so it didn't print really clear. But this was some of the new information that makes the link for us. And I just want to go over this really quickly so we can understand that we have the template on the side of manifestation that we don't see, and we have the manifestation in the hologram that we're walking around in. This is the meeting point between the outside and the inside, and this is what our thought fields are composed of. We and the other portions of our consciousness that are associated with the particle and the antiparticle, and the antiparticle universes all think thoughts in one of these primary particles. There will be the dominant thought field. Will either be a primary trionic thought field made of trions, primary dyadic thought field made of dions, or a primary myonic thought field made of myons. And this has everything to do with what we're seeing when we're seeing the illusion, because what we are seeing as the 3D hologram projected out is either a myon field, a dion field, or a trion field. And depending on which one we're seeing will show us which coordinate we're in. If we want to go to inner Earth, if we want to experience the reality fields of inner Earth, for instance, as real, that is a transharmonic time band that is of higher frequency than here, but closely linked in to our time band on Earth. I'll show you that relationship in a little bit. We would be seeing there the projection of a trion field. It would be made of trion units that came from antiparticles, that came from fully non-polarized Partakai units. Now, this shows us the chemical clothing, how the myons, trions, and dions become some of the known particles. They have not identified all of the particles because there's a bunch of things that science hasn't even identified, or the fact that all of these particles at different times flash on someplace else as their opposite, and then flash back on over here in different positions. So there's a lot that science is missing. But as far as identified particles and identified forces, energy forces that we know are here and influences are here, this is the relationship of these units to those forces that are part of our hologram. Now I'm going to read off. If you can't read that, I apologize. This is some of the new material that as soon as the whole translation on it is done, we'll send it. Just make sure we have your address. I think we have everybody's from the registrations, but just so we'll send it to you, so you will have all of this. There'll be a whole bunch of other charts that are probably going to take me 3 days each to do because they're really complicated. But this tells us that on the Partakai level, the Partakai were the original units, remember, that have the potentialities of both polarities, but they're not in polarity, so they're like a tripolar. They have the potentialities for no polarity and both. They are Partakai units, little scalar standing wave units made of Partakai in the template. The translation point where they start to take on chemical clothes, where they start to become wave forms that create movement rather than just standing still and flashing on and off. And from there, they create what are called, they are particles that are called ionic particulates, which means they have the ability to reverse their characteristics and change their characteristics by influence from each other. So they're not fixed like the templates are. And they move into the illusionary hologram of motion. So we have Partakai units form trions. Now the core polarity and electrical orientation of a Partakai unit would be a dual charge plus its own, because the dual charge actually creates another characteristic in relation to polarity. So it's really a tritone field. It's base electromagnetic. This is where electromagnetic force originates. As we know, we look at electronics and all of those things. Electromagnetic force is what makes this world go round down here. It also makes the world go round from D12, the prematter fields, all the way down. And the primal light fields have a relationship to electromagnetism, but it is more separated, where you have magnetic fields separated from electrical fields. And when you get into dimensionalization, after you go through the D12 point, you will start to have them both existing in relation to each other rather than fully separate areas. When we talk about electromagnetism, we're actually talking about the phenomena that causes what we perceive in the hologram as light and sound. Now, light is a translation of electricity. Sound is a translation of magnetism. And electrical and magnetic force are translations of each other in relation to the wholeness. What's interesting about the way dimensions are stacked is light in one field is sound in another. So when we look in our hologram, and if we are perceiving from the third strand, or from D3 consciousness, the light we are seeing is from the dimensional band above. What we are seeing as the stars and the sun and the light that it generates are the reality fields of density 2, dimension 4. What we are seeing as the physical down here on Earth field is a projection of the energy patterns that are in dimension 2. And our consciousness will be stationed right in between the two. What's happening right now is our consciousness is actually stationed in dimension 4. And we're perceiving what's in the D3, dimension 3 energy field. We're perceiving that down here as the Earth hologram. And that implies what we're perceiving when we look up at the stars and the sun and the light and the darkness. We are seeing the reality field of dimension 5, which is the center point of the timelines of Earth's density 2 counterpart, Tara. When the halls of Amenti stargates open, we have a blend. There is a blend of this timeline and that timeline, and we have the ability, if we know how, to shift our focus of attention into the density 5, or the D5 reality field, which would constitute in the hologram being able to see an area of oscillating energy, because you would sense it, because you would be sensitive to the higher frequencies that were coming in from the higher octaves of dimension 5. A person who did not have that level of strand activation in the DNA would not be able to see it, but you would. Some people have already started seeing what appear as mirages. I had a couple of people at different times in the last couple of years write to me and say, am I losing my mind? Because there's this thing that happened a couple of times, and I know I saw it, but like, am I hallucinating? What am I doing? They talked about seeing cities in the clouds. Not just like animal forms, oh, that one looks like a bunny, not that kind of thing. But literally, the light does something. There seems to be a shift in the light, just a little bit, and it's usually in the daytime that they have the experiences. And they'll see the clouds, but all of a sudden the clouds take on a look as if you're looking over mountaintops, and there's like a landscape there, even to the point where sometimes you can see city buildings. They look like ghost images that are made out of cloud stuff. These are people that were going into fifth strand activation early. They're starting to pick up the density 2 matter forms, and they will first appear as mirages or ghost images. Now, to be able to make that image become real, you have to establish a co-resonance, not with its frequency, but put your consciousness in the frequency band above it in order to experience it as real. If you want to go to Tara and experience D5 as real, you have to put your consciousness in D6 frequency, which means you have to fully activate and sustain activation of your 6th DNA strand template. So there is a total relationship to the hologram here. And it's kind of interesting. We look out in this world and say, oh, there's light, we know there's light, we know there's sound, whatever they are. You know? We just take the right in front of us and we take them for granted because they've always been a part of our experience here. But we're not taught what these things really are. The scientists will kind of poo-poo the concept of interdimensional spectrum, at least a lot of them do. Yet they'll analyze the heck out of light waves and sound waves, but they don't know what they're playing with. They don't realize they're dealing with a collision of interdimensional phenomena into one space that creates the hologram itself. When we go into the 3-day particle conversion period that I'll talk about more tomorrow, it's an interesting period of time. It's when all sorts of frequency bands run into each other, and you'll end up seeing a reality that has to do with where your DNA activation is, because that will position your consciousness in relation to this collision of frequencies all over the place. 3-day particle conversion, I'll tell you one thing, will have 3 days of darkness involved with it. And after the 3 days of darkness and the changes that take place there will be 3 days of light. These have to do with the physics changes that will be taking place in the atmosphere as Earth passes through the division point between density 1 matter and density 2 matter. It creates changes on the planet that, depending on how the stargates are working, if they're not working well and things are not going well with the planetary grids, can be catastrophic. We're not aiming for that. In fact, if the Guardians hadn't gotten involved in 1986, I think, 1983, they spotted the problem, that the place was going to go into pole shift because the Templar is damaged. When the stargates opened, we weren't going to go through stellar activation, we were going to go into pole shift. That's why the intervention was given at this time. So we're having a lot of help. There's going to be a lot of more interesting things we're going to talk about tomorrow when we get into more of the guts of what's going on now and what it appears we're being prepared for. It's a lot sooner than I was prepared to prepare anybody for it. I was like, yeah, I'll get used to this by 2012, and then because it's really, there's a disorientation factor that comes to even the most aware of us. There's a space where you go into where you're sitting there between this reality and that reality, and you know what the perceptions were like here and what you came to believe here and understand, and your mind kind of gets set in that pattern's in your cellular memory now. Then there's this whole new set of concepts that are coming. They're saying, and it's going to do this, and you're going to experience this, and you feel like you're in a science fiction movie. And you kind of sit in between the two and go, believe, not believe, believe, not believe. I'll believe today. I don't know if I believe today. I'll believe today. So it like flips you back and forth between the polarities of it. There's a stabilizing point that you can come to where you realize that there will be one version of a timeline that the events of seeing the halls of Amenti open won't happen, because the people who will not be able to hold the frequency of the transitions of the planet base moving up will go into a different time cycle, into the Phantom Earth time cycle. They will see a different reality that involves learning about the fact that ETs do exist and they're not all friendly. That's kind of what's on the agenda for the Phantom Earth time matrix. Now, it helps as we move into something as major, and it is major. A stellar activation cycle is major. A 3-day particle conversion period is almost unfathomable. Now, I have a lot of cellular memory open, and I've been on this planet, and I am on this planet in several other periods where stellar activations are occurring. 2 other periods. And unfortunately, in both of those periods, right after they consummated or the gates began to open, and they start with vortices. There are 7 planetary vortices that progressively begin to open over a series of years. The first opening of the interdimensional vortices, so with Vortice 4, started in the year 2000 here. Now, progressively every 4 years, another one is supposed to open, building up to the year 2012, when the halls of Amenti gates to here and to inner Earth, which takes you up into the higher densities, opens the gates to the higher densities we're supposed to open. I've been here, and I am here in other space-time locations, in other stellar activation cycles, where at the point where it consummated and the first gate started to open, the place was literally attacked, spaceships in the sky, that kind of stuff. And it was, the gates were shut. Because something like that happens, the halls of Amenti have to be shut. Because if they are invaded by force, and fallen angelic forces get control of the Crystal Pylon Temple network, that network is spliced into the 12 primary universal stargates in this time matrix. They could literally use the halls of Amenti to shut this time matrix down from D11 down, where they could hijack the whole time matrix. That's why they're after Earth. That's why they're after the halls of Amenti stargates. The history line that this planet is coming from right now holds the illusion of a past, a set of thought forms, a frequency field that this moment is being created from, in which there were cataclysmic changes that occurred rather than the victories. We took the lower sub-frequency bands. In every moment, there is a choice. You have 3, actually. You have the point of union, which would be the Partakai frequency field, the trion frequency field. You have the dion frequency field, which is an electrical charged field, which would represent the higher tone frequencies. Or you have the myonic field, that would represent the lower tone frequencies. And we have the choice as to which, by what ideas we choose, which outcome will resonate with our bodies. The thoughts we choose to accept as what is going to be the outcome will determine, they will set a pattern of frequency in our bodies. It will activate a Parthi that go with one of those timelines. The past, that it's part of the planetary and race karma pattern, or the imprint that's coming up from the part of the hologram we would call the past, involves several cataclysmic events and a history of them that have progressed up to this point. But we are at a point where all those time periods are lining up and opening to each other. This is our chance to take the higher octave this time and bring them together into a point of union where we can transmute it to the next highest level. This planet and its people and the consciousness on this planet, including the plants, minerals, rocks, everything, has been trapped here from 25,500 BC forward. They've not been able to get out of this particular density in this time matrix because of certain things that were done to the planetary grids that blocked the body's ability to hold higher frequency. So even if you would die the body here and leave the body, your consciousness could not pick up enough momentum to make the shift in angular rotation of particle spin needed to get your consciousness out of density 1 and into density 2 incarnational cycles, or holographic projection cycles. This is a time of great freedom that we're moving into. So when we begin to understand some of the basic physics involved and how our thoughts literally plug right into those physics, we can start to get in touch with the power that we have. And it's a new way. It's like relearning how to think. The first part is assimilating what the new thought is. Oh gosh, that is the hologram. And after a while, when you keep reminding yourself that, wow, when I'm seeing light in 3D, I'm seeing the D4 sound field. When I'm seeing, you start to interpret what you're seeing in a way more closely resembling what the reality of it is. It takes a while for that new pattern, that new thought pattern, to reach a critical mass resonance of energy, which means where it gets as much energy into it as the old pattern had, where it has the power to then drag the old pattern into it and transmute it and bring the whole thing up to a new experience and a new healed thought pattern. So there will be a moving back and forth as we learn to understand things like that, where we go, what was I seeing again? Okay, it's a hologram. I got that far. Now, how did that work? Was it a trion field, a myon field, a dion field? Wait a minute. So there'll be a process of reminding ourselves to remember what it is. And as soon as you do, you're opening the doorway for more information and more perception, more awareness, and more frequency, and thus more DNA activation to come in to your body. So when we get into the fields that are created, we have the part Chi units create trions, the part K units create dions, and the part Cum units create myons. The trions have the dual charge plus its own, so it makes it a tritone charge. They're base electromagnetic. Part K units are positive electrical. Okay? That means their electrical orientation is positive. You know how on a battery you have the negative polarity side and the positive polarity side? Well, this would be, the dions would have the positive electrical. They're considered base electric because of this. That means they have primarily a transmitting force and a transmitting purpose. They're not the ones that draw energy. They're the ones that push it out, which means they oscillate rather than vibrate, which means they move energy into a field instead of taking it out. Now, part Cum create the myons. They are the negative electrical orientation, or the electrical polarity. They are base magnetic. They are the particle units that will draw in energy from a field and send it to the part K particles, the base electric particles, who will then transmit it out. Now, the process by which this occurs, there's a graph that we were attempting to work on yesterday when they were showing me parts of this. This graph is like a nightmare graph. Then myons at D1, I mean, it changes all the way up, and then you have literally three dimensional scales running, interwoven with each other. You have the one that goes with the particle universe, or the part Cum universe. You have the one that goes with the anti-particle universe, the base electrical one, which is that's anti-particle, that's from the part K. And then you have the one in the middle, which is the inner Earth timeline, which is made of the trions, and it's the part Chi universe. And they're literally all interwoven with each other. It is because of this that the symbol image, which is a mathematical coding of the Vesica Pisces, becomes important. Because in this graph that I hope to get done at some point, it shows you where Merkaba fields are created, counter-rotating spirals of electromagnetic energy, which create spheres of energy, which then intersect with each other at specific angles. Each dimension would have a circle in it that's a sphere, and then in between each one, where the crossover line is, there would be the center point of another sphere, and you start to get Vesica Pisces going all the way up the dimensional scale. There's a mathematical code that allows for the shifting of angular rotation of particle spin back into its wholeness. That symbol will be used later this afternoon. We're going to be using the symbol in a beginning way, where we're going to heal or to raise to the next highest level of expression any thought form here. The secret is to combine it with its opposite. If there is a negative condition, it implies it has a positive condition existing in the anti-hologram, right? You need to bring the two of them together, and they literally undergo fusion and then